What's up everybody, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining today of all days. It's not our normal 9 PM on a Monday slot. I appreciate that, and I appreciate those of you who have made the effort to join me a day later. I apologise to those who were expecting it last night. I did put it on social media, but I was out for dinner with the family celebrating a family birthday. We just didn't get home in time, so that was the only excuse I've got. But I'm really pleased that we're going to do it today. And I know it's at a weird and earlier time, but that's meant that some other people are able to join that maybe can't normally see it live. I also appreciate that some people who can see it live on a Monday at 9 PM maybe can't join today. But look, this is what we've got. It might be a much smaller, much more intimate crew than we normally have on a Monday, but we're going to do it anyway because there's loads to talk about. The Austrian Grand Prix may not have been the most thrilling race that we've had all season, but there were still so many talking points. I know that not only from watching the race, but from the way that you guys have reached out, have responded, have sent me messages, DMs on Instagram and on Twitter and right here on YouTube. And for that reason, I felt like I had to do another live video today just to get some of that off of all of our chest and discuss some of the big talking points. So thank you wherever you are. I know that because so many people watch this from all over the world, the different time zones mean that this may have either worked out for you or not. So thank you wherever you are, as I say. We have got lots to talk about. We're obviously going to talk about the penalties, the stewarding decisions. We'll talk about Lando Norris's impressive performance, George Russell's impressive performance. We'll talk about Mercedes' lack of pace, Lewis's new contract, and of course anything else, the cancellation of the Australian Grand Prix, and so much more. So fire in your questions and we'll get through those as the evening goes on. I am here in a hotel in the midst of filming Wheeler Dealers as ever, as I am all the time at the moment, having brilliant fun. I've got to say today, Mike Brewer and I mean, I've just wiped the tears from my eyes after rolling around laughing all day long. I had the best day at work. I hope you've had a great day too. And I really can't wait for you guys to see the new episodes of Wheeler Dealers. I think you're going to like them. I'm really enjoying making it. And I genuinely think that we're making some great shows. It's a great long-running series that's been going for years and years. And I think we've continued in that vein, but also made some tweaks and some slight changes that I really hope you're going to love. So anyway, that is another story, but that's Wheeler Dealers coming later this year. Around about September, you should start to see the first episodes hit your screen. Anyway, let's talk Formula One. Where should we start? It feels like the place to start is the penalties. That's what all of the talk has been around. The stewarding decisions. Were the stewards too harsh? Were they absolutely spot on? Has Formula One lost its ability to go racing because nobody can quite dare make a brave move without the fear of a penalty? Well, here's my take on all of this. My take was that at the weekend, the stewards got it absolutely right. Now, before you all leap on the keyboards telling me what an idiot I am and how wrong I am, I'm saying the stewards got it absolutely right given the rules that they have to work towards, given the Formula One regulations and guidelines that they are governed by. And that, I think, is where the problem is. There is a rule written in the Formula One code which says, you know, if you're making an overtake, you know, and the car making the overtake has a predominant part of its car alongside the car that it's overtaking, then the driver being overtaken must leave at least a car's width on the edge of the circuit for that car to fill. Now, for me, that's where we've got this wrong. I appreciate why that rule was written, and in many circumstances it works perfectly well. But what we need to have, in my humble opinion, is an element of common sense that can be applied to these things. Because in the incidents that happened on Sunday in Austria, I mean, let's talk about the Lando Norris, Sergio Perez one as an example, but this could be applied to pretty much all of them. Sergio made a very brave, a very risky move. It was a high-risk move down the outside where he knew, and this is just natural racing line, the gap closes towards the exit of the corner. From the apex onwards, the natural line of the car, of any car on the racing line, is going to close out that gap on the edge of the circuit. So if you go down the outside, you know that that gap's going to disappear. And if you haven't completely got your car past, there is a very big risk that you will get run off the road. Now, what do you want to do? Do you expect then the driver on the inside to massively compromise their own line, given that they may well be already going at full racing speed? They may not even have the option to compromise their racing line if they went into that corner at full racing speed. Bear in mind, every driver, when they're going for an absolute limit lap, they are piling into an apex, and on the exit of the corner, they are on the absolute limit of their car's grip levels, the car's traction levels. The car, there's nothing left. There is no scope for just putting a little bit more right hand down to give a bit more space. Yes, you may not be always at the limit, but that's typically what a racing driver's doing. If you go down the outside, you have to take all of that into consideration, in my opinion. If you're going down the inside for an overtake, completely different. That's the safer way to make an overtake. That's the less risky way in terms of the car that you're overtaking is less likely to run into you in that scenario. Assuming you've got a large part of the car alongside that car that you're overtaking, they should then not turn in. That is then an option for the car that's being overtaken. If you've taken a lunge down the inside into the braking zone, if you're being overtaken, you think, well, that car has gone way too deep, way too fast into that corner, you have the option to jump on your brakes, let him slide off if that's what he's going to do, if he's overcooked it. Lock the tyres off, slide off into the gravel. We've seen it many times before, and then you can cut back and continue on your way. But if that driver's got it right, if that big lunge down the inside was kept under control, that's what we want to see. That's great racing. That's the brilliant sorts of overtakes that we see Daniel Ricciardo doing over the years. And that's what should be encouraged. If we're going to say you can take that same bold, brave, maybe even risky move down the outside, and then the driver on the inside is expected to just let you through, where's the skill in that? Where's the overtaking skill in that? That's just lunging down the outside, knowing that the stewards will be on your side, assuming you can get past the apex of the corner. That's where I think the problem lies. And as soon as they penalised Lando Norris for that early overtake, of course they had to do exactly the same to Sergio Perez later in the race on those two occasions in the interests of consistency. And that, of course, is the other element to all of this. And I'm sure, I'll check your comments in a moment, but I'm sure many of you are already saying it's consistency that we want. Because we've seen other incidents in other races on other days, very similar to this, that have gone unpenalised. And that I would 100% agree with. Consistency is all really anybody wants, whether or not you agree or disagree with the rule. And what I've just described there is how I'm slightly disagreeing with a rule today that I think should be updated to allow the stewards to apply common sense to certain incidents. But whether or not you agree or not, it's just consistency. Because if it's been deemed the same every single time, if it's applied in the same way every single time, well, we as fans know what to expect, drivers know what to expect, and there should be no surprises and fewer talking points of this nature following a set of stewards' decisions on the course of a Grand Prix weekend. Whew, there we go. I'm going to take a sip of my pint and I'm going to get to your comments now because I want to know what you think on that. I think it's the rules that maybe need a tweak rather than the way the stewards are applying, assuming they apply them consistency from race to race. Right, what are you saying on this? The driver on the inside should leave a car's width if there's a car alongside. Well, that is the way the rule is written, absolutely. And that's why I'm saying the stewards got it right, because they applied Formula One's rules to the letter, and you can't really argue with that. But the rules don't give the stewards any scope to apply some common sense or to look at it on a case-by-case incident. That's my argument there. Tyre shredding glass instead of gravel. It's not about what's on the outside of the corner. And this is the other element to this, because I've seen some stuff written actually today when I was flicking through the F1 press, that it looks like, if you go through historical incidents, that the stewards are applying penalties based on what the outcome of the incident was. So if a driver ended up in the gravel and their race was effectively ruined as a consequence of making that overtake and effectively being pushed off the track, well, then a penalty's applied. Whereas if they're on a circuit with lots of runoff and they just get pushed a little bit wide, then quite often no penalties applied for a very similar incident. That is what I'm talking about when it comes to consistency. It shouldn't be down to the consequence. It shouldn't be down to how detrimental the move ended up being on a particular driver. It should be the act. It should be the driving standards that are either penalised or encouraged, not the consequence of what those driving standards were, in my opinion. How was this one different in your opinion? Lando versus Perez versus Lewis versus Albon. Well, exactly. That's exactly my point. Yes, they're 2 different days. 2 different sets of stewards, probably. I can't remember who was stewarding that particular day, but this is where we need consistency. And whichever we think is right or wrong, and that opinion will be split right down the middle because the fan base is split. If you're a Lewis Hamilton fan on that particular day, you're probably going to say Lewis was right. Lewis didn't deserve a penalty in that Albon and Lewis Hamilton incident all those years ago. Whereas if you're a Lando Norris fan, you're going to be shouting, saying, well, we didn't deserve a penalty this weekend. So it's about consistency. I mean, I think it needs to have the rules clarified, as I say, with this little line somewhere written in it where the stewards have some discretion to apply common sense to each individual incident. Albon was in front. Yeah, look, I don't want to go through the specifics of each incident. This is not really about each incident because, yes, as I said, by the letter of the law, Sergio Perez had his car well alongside Lando Norris at the weekend, but he did it in a very risky way. He's got to accept that if he's going to go for that kind of overtake, there's a huge risk that he's going to get pushed off the circuit and may well either result in contact or he might get pushed off into the gravel. That's the risk you take if you're willing to go down the outside into a corner for an overtake. As I said before, the less risky scenario is to go down the inside, but of course the defending driver also knows that and may well defend. But that's racing. That's exactly what we want. We want drivers moving, defending, having to find alternate ways to attack. We don't want drivers being unwilling to go into a corner, being ready to rely on the stewards to get them out of what was a risky position they put themselves into in the case of Sergio Perez in that particular incident, is what I think. Shona James agrees with me. Were the Lando points needed though? Well, this is the other thing, isn't it? Points applied after a penalty is something else that is part of the stewards' remit. That is part of their mandate. And let's be clear on this, the way that penalties are applied to certain incidents is something that's regularly updated, but it's only updated when it's run by the team. So the teams all agree on how penalties should be applied, what kind of severity certain incidents should be met with in terms of penalty points, when drivers should be allowed to go racing, first lap incidents, should they be more lenient? These things are all discussed in meetings with the teams, and I'm sure I saw over the weekend that it was only last season, quite late on last season, that all of the teams agreed on the current structure for penalties being applied. So if you're going to say that the stewards got it right with that penalty, given the rules they have to work within, well, then they also have to apply the penalty points to their licence. I agree with all of those of you saying that was way too harsh. And if Lando Norris had received a 1 race ban, which, by the way, he was incredibly close to, I think he's got up to 10 points at the end of the Austrian Grand Prix. If you get to 12 points, you are immediately faced with a 1 race ban. If Lando Norris had received a ban as a result of that incident, and perhaps a number of other incidents of a similar nature, you'd feel that was really harsh, wouldn't you? Because he was just driving his race. Now, I'm not going to sway on the side of a particular driver. I'm going to try and remain as unbiased as I can here, but that's where I think the problem lies. This has to come down to stewards' discretion. We have a driver steward in every single meeting, in every single room, at every single Grand Prix now, and whether or not you agree or not with their decisions, that driver steward is in there for exactly this reason, to apply some racing common sense from the perspective of a driver. We can't ask for much more than that, other than maybe the same stewards at every single race, which I think is a great idea, by the way. But consistency is all we want to be applied every single time out. Consistency, says Barry McGuinness. Absolutely. Did Perez get penalty points too, says Maria Holland. Yes, he did. He got penalty points for both of the incidents that he was penalised for in exactly the same way. So the stewards were consistent over the course of this weekend. We can just argue that maybe they weren't consistent if we compare it to other incidents in seasons gone by at different racetracks and on different weekends. And that is something that's quite hard to achieve if you've got different stewards turning up at every Grand Prix. But it's also just quite hard to achieve anyway, given that it's a different day, quite often different circumstances. But the more consistency we can get into these decisions, the happier fans will be, the more appeased fans will be over all this stuff. But I thought this weekend, the stewards actually did a pretty good job. As I said before, I think it's the rules that need the tweak. We want overtaking, and we're not going to get it by pushing others off the racetrack. Well, we can argue this all day long. Of course we're not, but should we also be saying that those drivers, certainly in the incident of Sergio Perez over Lando, really early on in the race, it was a move that probably Sergio shouldn't have gone for at that stage. He had the car that was capable of getting past Lando at some point, and he should have been a bit more patient. That was one of the things, and it's not part of this penalty decision, but just from a Sergio Perez perspective, on that particular moment, I think we can all agree he probably should have been a bit more patient and less risky. How do you rate Michael Massey's job as the race director so far? So that's a really difficult one, and Michael Massey comes under a huge amount of flack because much more so than Charlie Whiting ever used to do, he's actually gone very much more public. He comes out now, he gives statements to the press more regularly than Charlie Whiting used to do. He explains a lot of his decisions, so in that way alone, he also opens himself up to a huge amount more criticism. Having said that, I do think he's got a number of things wrong, particularly when it comes to some of the safety critical elements that we've seen over the last couple of seasons. There are a number of very questionable ones which I think he should have dealt with a lot more harshly. But it's very easy to sit in our armchairs and on our sofas and criticise the race director just like it is a referee in a football match. When you're in the midst of it, and believe me, the race director has radio feeds coming in from every single team pit wall, as well as all of his own people, as well as the feeds coming from all around the racetrack from his own marshals and the safety car and medical car. So many feeds coming into his ear that are all chattering over each other over the course of the whole race. He's under huge pressure. They're now even broadcasting some of that radio between him and the teams. It's very, very easy to criticise. It's a much more difficult job to do in the moment. I think there are things that could have been done better, but in the whole, I would say Michael Massey's done a reasonable job. Definitely can be improved, but I don't want to criticise him too much. What do you guys think? Jazz Woodall says, just joined, didn't know you were going live. I'm sorry, Jazz. This is a bit out of turn, isn't it? Tuesday at 7 p.m, but thanks for joining anyway. Josh Smith says, Mark, is it coming home? It is coming home. I'm going straight downstairs to watch the other semi-final in a moment, as soon as we've finished here, to find out who England will be playing this weekend on Sunday. But anyway, let's not get into football chat now. Time to hit the like button, says Wellbeak. Yes, please do that. That'd be awesome. It's hard racing, but that's what we want. So that is the other argument. Do we just let the drivers go for it? And if they want to start bashing wheels, do we let them do that and take the consequences on the racetrack and maybe refrain from the stewards getting involved in a lot of that stuff? Well, listen, I understand that point of view, and actually there are a number of elements when that might be great and that might well work. But on the flip side of that, you have to maintain driving standards. And if we let them just go for it, of course those driving standards would just deteriorate. People would try to win at all costs, and they become safety issues, they become sporting issues that we need to maintain a lid on. We need to race to certain standards in Formula One, and that is exactly what the stewards are there to police. So it's difficult to say just let them go for it, because as we know, teams and drivers will take liberties. Right, what track do you think will... Okay, so what track do you think will be in place of Australia? So let's get on to that then. They cancelled the Australian Grand Prix officially today. I think lots of people were sort of hoping we'd still get there. It's a great racetrack, it's a great event, and to do it in November I think would have been quite cool, different as well. But it's gone. Now, I know I've spoken to quite a few of my friends in the Formula One pit lane today. They're all hoping, of course, that they don't replace Australia, because 23 races, not many people inside the circle of Formula One are really looking forward to. Maybe as fans, we all want as many races as possible, or lots of us do, but there is a big desire from Formula One to get this 23 race season done. They've been promising 23 races now for a couple of years, and of course last year didn't manage to do it, despite all the great efforts. This year they really want to try and hit that target, Of course, 23 races for the people in Formula One bring in a huge amount of money. More money than if it were just 22 races, of course. And that's what they want to try and achieve. They've got a huge recovery to try and manage off the back of last year, where not only Formula One, but the teams and lots of the other stakeholders, the broadcasters, suffered financially off the back of a massively disrupted Formula One season. 23 races, of course, would go some way to try and recover some of that. And that's the biggest driver in trying to desperately maintain that huge number of Grand Prix. As to what's going to replace it, for me, it feels like if they do push ahead and try to stick with 23 races, and let's not forget, there may well be more cancelled yet. This is not over. It feels to me like the safest, the easiest option is to go back to the Middle East. We're going there anyway, and add in an extra race in somewhere like Bahrain, maybe on that outer circuit that we used at the tail end of last year, or a double header somewhere else like Abu Dhabi or even Saudi Arabia at some point. The Middle East has proven itself, particularly those circuits I mentioned, as being capable of hosting races safely in the COVID environment. And that stands for an awful lot. That means that it's a proven model and they can just sail in and do it again. It works. So it feels like that would be the easiest option from an F1 perspective. But look, it may or may not happen, and we may or may not lose more races yet. So whilst the goal is to achieve 23 races, who knows what's going to happen over the course of the next 6 months. Right, let's get back to the penalties quickly, because G. Thompson says, if Perez was clearly ahead going into the corner, then penalty. But he wasn't. Leclerc may have been more ahead. So same sort of thing, isn't it? This is all about... And when I say that there should be some common sense applied to this, it feels to me like the stewards should be able to look at each incident, not having to fit each incident into a very strict set of parameters, which is the way we have it right now, parameters that don't allow for specifics of that particular moment, whether it was wet, whether it was early in the race, whether, you know, a driver bowled into a corner almost out of control, just on the off chance that they might force the other driver to allow them through because the stewards otherwise would give them a penalty. Or do they say that somebody like Sergio Perez took a very risky move against Lando Norris? Lando Norris just followed the racing line. Maybe you could argue on certain incidents wasn't able to adjust his line because he's on the absolute limit of traction anyway. And therefore, because Sergio took the risky manoeuvre, the risky choice in going for it, he lost out. The risk didn't pay off. Surely if a driver takes a big risk, well, that risk can either work for you or against you. And surely the stewards should be able to take that into consideration. You can't say you go into a risky move and unless the other driver gets out of the way, you're going to hand that position to the driver on a plate through the steward's office. I don't feel that's how it should work. Anyway, right, shall we move it on? Talked enough about penalties. And Graham Down says, will George replace Bottas next season, do you think? Well, big talking point, and we'll tie this in with the Lewis Hamilton contract announcement, of course, that came ahead of this weekend in Austria. First of all, great news that Lewis is staying. I think most people could agree with that. Great news for Lewis, great news for the team, great news for Formula One. You know, whatever you think of Lewis Hamilton is an incredible ambassador for this sport. Our sport has been richly enhanced by the presence of Lewis Hamilton, even if you only take his sporting achievements. He is now statistically the greatest Formula One driver that has ever graced this sport. And that's a special moment to be in as a fan, as a competitor, as a team member. Then that's not going to go on forever, which means we're in a very special period in history, seeing a very special driver, even you could argue, still coming towards or at his peak. So the longer that can continue, for me, then great. The sport benefits. Now, off the back of that, you've got to say, okay, why has Lewis Hamilton signed a 2-year contract? Firstly, I think there's going to be a huge desire to try and get that 8th World Championship. That may well not happen this season. It's looking more and more likely that may well go to Max Verstappen. So does that mean Lewis walks away with 7 World Championships, or does he continue to push for that elusive 8th that would make him the most successful in terms of championships ever in the history of the sport? I think he wants that record. Whatever Lewis says about not caring about records, I've worked with him, I've spent time with him, I know that's not the case. He knows a lot of those records in his head, even when he says he doesn't. They're all in there, or he's aware of them at least. I think he wants that one. Secondly, I think there's a huge desire to drive, from all drivers, the next year, the next generation of Formula One cars, the 2022 cars that are going to be so different. The sport's going to be potentially so different over the next couple of years. And I think there must be huge intrigue from drivers to not want to miss out on that. That must be a part of it. But the other part of this, which I think is quite interesting, is around what Mercedes must have said to Lewis Hamilton to convince him, going into a new era of our sport, to convince him that this is a seat worth hanging on to. That this team may well be struggling now, but is that because they've focused so much development so early onto the 2022 car, they've convinced him that they are going to hit the ground running like they did with the new regulations back in 2014, and Mercedes will be a dominant force in the next era of Formula One, because that's the kind of thing, just like it did all those years ago when they tempted away from McLaren, that will convince Lewis Hamilton to stay. Knowing that, yes, 2021 might be a sacrificial year, but it's all going to come with a massive reward from 2022 onwards. And I think that might be one of the most interesting things behind the scenes. I even saw Toto Wolff strongly suggest this won't be Lewis Hamilton's last contract. And if there's any truth in that, that might also hint that Mercedes are looking good or are well advanced in their preparations to attack a new set of regulations from 2022 and beyond, together with a new engine at 2025 or 26, whenever that comes, that this could be Lewis Hamilton still pursuing more and more championships in a team that wants exactly the same. What are you saying? So the original question was, is George going to replace Bottas, wasn't it? Sorry, I totally moved that on. Is George going to replace Bottas? My feeling is, just to answer that one, that now that Lewis has signed a contract for the next 2 years, I think we'll get a 1-year extension with Valtteri Bottas for next year to bring consistency between one set of regulations and the next. And then potentially, if Lewis is looking like hanging up his boots at the end of 2023, well then they could bring George Russell in for a year to work alongside him and then essentially take over the reins once Lewis disappears, if indeed that's what happens. That's my gut feeling. There's no evidence to suggest that. Valtteri Bottas did a really strong showing this weekend. He did as good as he could have probably done with that particular car. He needs more of those. He needs consistent performances. But as we've heard many, many times, Lewis has no desire to switch up his teammate. And if Valtteri can deliver something that's consistent and strong and keep this brilliant team dynamic, I don't think they'll change him yet. Right. Did Hamilton compliment Norris to raise doubts about Russell? I don't think so. So that's referring to Lewis's radio comment saying that Lando Norris is such a great driver when he eventually got by him. I don't think there's anything more to that. I think that is just him reflecting on the fact that Lando Norris is doing a brilliant job, and he is doing a brilliant job, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in a moment. But let's keep it with Lewis Hamilton, George Russell, Valtteri Bottas at the moment. What are your thoughts on that? Will Mercedes find pace? I don't think they're going to find enough pace, is my honest feeling here. I don't think they're going to find enough pace to claw back the performance deficit that they've already got from Red Bull, with more and more components coming. And I do think this all stems back to the regulation change that we've had between 2020 and 2021, the aero reg change, which has clearly hurt the Mercedes with their lower rake car. And the problem with that, and this all centres around the way the rear brake ducts sit in relation to the wheel at the rear of the car. On a high rake car, of course, they're the floor is much higher up in relation to the brake duct. On a low rake car, it's sitting much lower, and the interaction between these cutouts around the floor and the loss of the flick-ups on the floor in relation to the brake ducts, which also play a huge part in creating downforce at the rear end and sealing the diffuser at the rear end, I think it's the low rate cars that have had the biggest negative effect as a result of that. And the problem is it's not a quick and easy fix. I mean, if it was, a team like Mercedes with the resource they have would have fixed it, but it just isn't. They can't just jack their car up like Red Bull have, because it's all designed around a low rate concept. It's designed to run at that much flatter level. If you jack it up, the front wing won't work, the barge boards won't work. It just will not work in that different state. So it's not a quick and easy fix, but that's what I think is the biggest problem and why it's not an easy one to fix for Mercedes. So maybe why I don't think they'll find enough pace to overhaul them. I do think it'll be close at certain racetracks. Silverstone, of course, coming up. Normally a big Mercedes circuit. Lewis is very strong around there. We've got 140,000 fans in Silverstone. He thrives off that energy. He brings a little bit of extra 5 or 10% to his own game. The team will also do the same, and I think they're bringing some components to Silverstone as well to try and help. But will it be enough? Only time will tell. Maybe Lewis sees the writing on the wall this year. Red Bull, Max too good. Well, look, Red Bull and Max are too good right now. Lewis and Mercedes simply can't keep up, but I think those are the reasons that I've just been talking about. Tom Wire says, is George being too patient with Mercedes? Do you think he needs to go out and push himself with other teams like Sainz did with Red Bull? Well, see, that's a good point, and I've thought about this quite a lot. And I think George Russell, first of all, he's having lots of conversations with Mercedes behind the scenes. We're not party to those, so he has a lot more information to us. But he also realises that whilst Mercedes is at the very top of their game, they are one of, if not the strongest team in the sport and have been for so long. And in the same way I just talked about with Lewis Hamilton, they have every chance of dominating the next era of the sport. They've got the best resources, the best people, the best facilities. They are best placed to deal with a regulation change, along with Red Bull and Ferraris of this world, of course, who have similar levels of resource. But Mercedes are one of the strongest seats in the paddock. Now, to walk away from that opportunity, an opportunity that you know is coming, whether it's this year, next year, the year after, whenever, you know that seat's coming. And if he walks away from that and chases a seat at a Renault or somewhere else that's been talked about, does he then forego that opportunity to eventually become that Mercedes talisman? An opportunity that's coming, we know one way or the other, because Lewis Hamilton will not be around in this sport forever. He's coming to the end of his career, and George Russell appears to be the natural successor to that. So I absolutely think George will have had reassurances from Mercedes. Whether that's an absolute time frame or not, we don't know. But he'll have had reassurances, and I'm sure he will feel confident that those reassurances will come true. Would you love to see George stay at Williams and help them bring the team up to the front of the grid? Well, look, that may well be what happens in the short term. And if it is, then fine. You know, Williams are a team that, all right, they may not be going to challenge for championships in any of the next few seasons, but they are certainly a team that will be turning a corner. They've got great investment, serious investment, and they've made some great appointments. Jos Capito, we've talked about on this stream many times before. Jos Capito is an incredible asset to any Formula One team, and he's now fully entrenched in that organisation and starting the process of rebuilding, of turning things around and building back towards success. They've got long-term goals at Williams. This is not a short-term investment where Dorilton have plumbed money into the team and want to get it out again quick. They've committed to the long term, and you can see that through some of the investments they've made already in the organisation. So if George has to stay for another couple of years, if that's what it is, then, you know, it may not be the worst decision in the world. Jos Capito wants to keep him. I'm not surprised at that. I think everybody would. I've got a feeling that Russell's going to be left on a shelf. Things change fast in F1, says P1. Well, look, we thought some of these things about Esteban Ocon a couple of years ago. He was, before George Russell, perhaps the next most prominent Mercedes young driver. And did he get left on a shelf? Perhaps. He had to sit out for a year. But he's now at Renault. He's not setting the world on fire, but neither is the Renault in terms of a car. I think George Russell is doing everything. He's in the slowest car on the grid on many occasions right now, and yet still putting in standout performances. you know, if he keeps doing that, he will stay at the forefront of people's minds and eventually he will get the opportunity. Can George Russell drive for Aston Martin? Yes, that is another possibility. We heard George Russell say at the weekend, I will have a Mercedes engine behind me in next year's car. Whether that's in a Mercedes Works team or whether it's in a Williams with a Mercedes engine, or it could be somewhere else. Could it be that he could move his way up the grid a little bit to get into Aston Martin? We know they've got a very close relationship, but that would of course mean one of Aston Martin's drivers walking away. Sebastian Vettel is in the first year of a multi-year contract, and I just can't see Lance Stroll walking away either, and nor should he. He's doing a decent job in that car in the most part too. So is there going to be an opportunity? The other Mercedes powered team of course is McLaren, and in the same way they've got two drivers early on in their current contracts. There is no seat for him at any of those teams in the immediate future. Right, do you think Pato O'Ward or any of the young kids in IndyCar could get a seat in F1 next season? Colton Herta in a Haas would be exciting and could help them get US sponsors. There is no reason why an IndyCar driver couldn't make it in F1, and I'd love to see it. I know that Formula One themselves have a desire to try and help that move along. Because they're trying to grow the sport in the States. And it's a big driver for those people at Liberty trying to grow F1. And Haas obviously seems like the most natural place for that, an American-based team. And if Formula One can help grease the wheels of a move like that, and I'm talking financially, obviously, it might also help a team like Haas to stay on the grid, a team that's pretty fragile in its structure, in its makeup, and who knows how long they'll be around if they can't get some assistance from somebody like that, either a paying driver, which of course they have at the moment, or a driver that's being paid for by somebody else, maybe even Formula One themselves. So definitely not out of the question. And look, the two drivers they have right now are not doing the best job. Yes, it's a difficult car, but they're not doing the best job. Perhaps it could be up for a change at some point. Alonso, a way better driver than Ocon, says Cosmos Trek. I don't think many people would argue with that one. Alonso seems to have settled in quite nicely, doesn't he? A few races now into the season, starting to get to grips with things. We're starting to see flashes of the old Alonso. I thought it was really nice that Alonso, in that last lap battle with George Russell, where Alonso ended up taking the final point on Sunday, immediately got out of the car and went straight to George Russell to almost apologise and almost say, listen, great battle, I really wish it wasn't you that I had to take the point away from. Really nice touch from that perspective, but really we are seeing some strong things now from Fernando Alonso, as I guess we would have expected. Why is Daniel struggling so much compared to Lando? This is the huge question that even Daniel, I think, is asking himself. Again, we're seeing flashes of brilliance from Daniel, more so in a race scenario, but in qualifying he's really struggling, and he's perhaps the last of the new drivers, or the drivers that have switched teams, to really get an understanding of his new car, to get to grips with it. And I think from what you pick up from his interviews, he's finding little details, and it's always tiny details each week that are helping him to get a little bit more out of it. But it's the same thing that why can't any other driver seem to get the same out of a Red Bull as Max Verstappen? They both got the same car, they're both driving around the same racetrack, so it can only be driver inputs that are making the difference. But when we talk about driver inputs, we're talking about, the tiniest differences. I've sat in meetings, I've looked at data traces between our two drivers, where you see jumping on the brakes a metre, 2 metres later into a corner, scrubbing off the speed a little bit less and exiting the corner a little bit faster. But when you talk about those things out loud in words, it seems like an easy thing to fix. When you look at the data, you're talking about the finest of margins. And bear in mind that when a driver jumps on the brakes at the last possible moment they think is the car's capable of, there is no scope to just hang on for an extra couple of metres. So in that sense, you've then got to start setting the car up differently, and that might affect a different part of your driving style. Maybe you have to affect something like mid-corner speed to enable you to carry speed into a corner a little bit deeper, or get on the power a little bit earlier because the car behaves in a slightly different way, and that might feel unnatural to you. Those are the kinds of differences when we talk about driving style. Drivers have grown up through the categories driving a certain way, being successful by driving a certain way. It's unnatural to start changing that. It's like writing with your right hand all the way through school, and then when you leave and start your first job in your 20s, someone says, well, you know, we all write with the left hand here. You know, this is what we do in this company, we write with the left hand. And all of a sudden you can't write. Now, those people, they know how to write, but they can't do it with the left hand. They can't do it this different way. And it's a little bit like that when it comes to driving style. They have to find ways to adapt which are so unnatural to them. Yes, we're talking about little bits, but it's those little bits that can be the difference between being fast or not, particularly over one lap. Can we see a McLaren victory this season? Yeah, I think we can, you know. I honestly think we can. Lando Norris is quick enough at the moment to be right up there. Now, he may not have the pace to challenge a Red Bull over the course of a race as things stand, but there is going to come a time when a Max Verstappen doesn't finish a Grand Prix. He might have a technical incident, he might have a puncture, he might have an accident, he might have a crash. Anything could happen. And then it falls to the people who are best of the rest to pick up, you know, those random victories. And there is nothing stopping Lando Norris being in a position to do that at some point this season. We might assume that it would be a Mercedes that would pick up those points, but just look at what happened at the weekend. It could have easily been Lando in a scenario like that. So let's keep our fingers crossed, McLaren fans. That could well happen. And their progression, their trajectory that they are on, particularly in the hands of Lando, and I've no doubt that Daniel will get there, is going in exactly the right direction, and I can't wait to see more success come their way. Yes, George to McLaren if Norris allows it. Well, I don't think Norris is going to have any say in who comes alongside as his teammate. I think it's more the fact that Daniel has a contract right now, and that I don't think, unless there are any severe performance-based clauses in there, that McLaren would activate, and I think that's highly unlikely. I can't see anybody replacing them in the short term. Right, hold on, where are we? Thoughts on Porsche and VW 2025 engines and possible situations. So, Formula One, we know, are planning to bring new power units for 2025. However, there have been meetings over the course of the weekend, and a number of the teams are now agreeing on the fact that it might well be worth delaying that introduction until 2026, mostly because they don't feel that they're ready with the technology. We're bringing in a new, and I agree with them, by the way, on this, we are bringing in a new set of power units which inevitably will stay in this sport for the next few years. However many years that is, we don't yet know, but let's say at least 5 years, probably more. Now, that technology that we then showcase in Formula One should be the very best. There's a big push to make that run on some kind of biofuels, some eco-fuels. That will be a huge step in the right direction, but the technology is just not quite there yet. And if we're going to do it, we have to be leading the way. We have to be the best, in the same way that we have taken hybrid power units and absolutely smashed them out the park, made these engines the most efficient anywhere on the planet. We should be doing the same with the next set of power units, and we should be leading the way in a set of new technologies which the rest of the world can then benefit from. And at the moment, we're not ready either with that technology, and certainly not ready in time with that technology to give the teams and power unit manufacturers enough time to investigate, to research, to design and manufacture those engines for the 2025 season. Now, when it comes to people like Porsche or VW or others, they will be very interested in that technology if, as I say, it's a class-leading, groundbreaking technology that a company like Porsche or VW can absolutely benefit from developing inside the world of Formula One. They can justify an enormous spend in Formula One if that development trickles down to their road cars, and they can be seen to be leading the way with the next set of eco technologies that will then power our road cars for years to come. If we don't do that, those companies will have zero interest and zero reason to get involved in what is otherwise just an incredibly expensive sport. So it's hanging in the balance right now. These decisions are about to be made, and those companies that are currently part of these discussions, by the way, will have a big say in which direction it goes. Right. Could McLaren and Lando win at Monza this year? Well, again, same thing. Again, they have a very quick car in a straight line that's even quicker than the works Mercedes in a straight line on many occasions. In low downforce trim, the Mercedes doesn't seem to work as well, does it? And the McLaren seemingly working very much better. But there's a big thing in the way of that victory, which is Max Verstappen and the Red Bull, which does seem to now work in low downforce conditions, which it hasn't really done so well in years gone by. So if there's a situation where Max and Red Bull can't win the race, there's nothing to stop Lando Norris and McLaren doing just that. V12s are not coming back, so move on. Yeah, V12s are definitely not coming back as things stand, that's for sure. However, look, let's just touch on that very quickly. If Formula One can ever get to a point where we're running on clean fuels, and if we can ever get to a point where we're with clean emissions, and we are a long way from this right now, I appreciate, but if we can do all of that, then why not go back to something that's loud, screaming V8s, V10s, V12s, if we can do it in a way that's not, you know, negatively affecting the environment. There's nothing to say at some point we couldn't do that. But that's why this big push for clean fuels and eventually clean emissions is the holy grail. Rumour has it that Schumacher is going to Alfa next year, so Kimi and Bottas to Williams. I mean, who knows? I think, who knows? I mean, the Schumacher to Alfa is a decent shout. I think could well happen. He's done seemingly a decent job, and of course all of those teams, including Ferrari, will have access to the engineers that will have a very clear understanding of how good he's performing, the data as well, which will also show how well he's doing. At the moment we can only measure him against his teammate, and that's not a great measure right now. It's a little bit like George Russell against Latifi. Latifi is, quite frankly, not a top tier driver, but all you can do in that situation is smash your teammate out the ballpark, and certainly George Russell is doing that consistently. I think Mick Schumacher more or less is doing that too. Max and Norris will be future teammates. What a great team that would be. Good shout. Why did Tsunoda keep making the white line mistake? It's a very good question. Twice he got penalised for cutting the white line on pit lane entry, and twice he got penalties and penalty points for it. So he's making a lot of mistakes, Yuki Tsunoda. I think he's a really exciting driver. I think he's got potential to be great in Formula One. I think he's potentially a great Red Bull driver. But they will only have so much patience with the mistakes that he's making, not only in terms of things like that, but also his crashes, his spins. You'll forgive a lot of that with a rookie driver for some time, but not forever. Red Bull are typically not the most patient of organisations, and so how long that will last, I don't know. Am I still against the fastest lap point? Yes. Yes. It's not actually that I'm against it, I just don't see the point of it. But anyway, we've covered that in many times before. What is clean fuel? Can you drink it? I wouldn't. There is fuel, and I have done this on TV before. The fuel that the Formula E generators run on, that charge up the cars at the Formula E event, is based on a clean glycerin fuel, and you can drink it, and I've done it to prove you can drink it. It tastes disgusting though, so I'm not sure why you would want to. But that's not the same as the fuel that, of course, we would ever use in Formula One. Clean fuel or eco-fuel or biofuel is a very broad term, and there is no clearly defined parameters that has to sit in. You know, we're talking about the next generation of fuels that Formula One operates on as being clean, eco, biofuel, but we don't yet know exactly what form that will take. I mean, Formula One fuel right now currently has 5% biofuel in it. Next year it will have 10% biofuel in it, and eventually we hope to get to 100% biofuel. So that's sustainable fuel. That's fuel that essentially we can grow instead of mining from from deep in these restricted or finite resources buried in the earth, if we can grow it through plantation, it becomes sustainable, and that alleviates one of the huge problems with the current fuels that we use. So that's the direction that we're going in, but no one quite knows yet how that will work best. Whether we'll be able to generate the same levels of power or range, contain similar levels of energy from a fuel that we can grow sustainably to the fuels that we currently produce. And that ultimately is the problem, because right now we can't, or certainly not on a mass scale that we would need it. Would Carlos still be outperforming Lando if he was still at McLaren? Well, that's an almost unanswerable question, but let's face it, Carlos was more experienced than Lando. Lando on occasions outperformed Carlos. They were actually quite closely matched on a number of occasions. And I've got to say, Carlos, a great driver. I think an underrated driver over previous iterations of his career. Certainly Red Bull underrated him. I think Renault underrated him. And it was only really when he got to McLaren that we began to get the best out of him. But we're already starting to see some real flashes of brilliance at Ferrari. So I think he's a great driver. And actually, if it had still been Carlos and Lando at McLaren in the car they have this year, can you imagine how good the team would have been? Can you imagine how consistent and great their results would have been if both of those two drivers had been having a ding-dong all season in a car that on occasions can mix it with a Mercedes and a Red Bull? It would have been awesome, wouldn't it? I mean, look, Ferrari are a great organisation, and we can all see why Carlos was tempted to go there. He's not going there for the short term, he's going for the long term. And I have no doubt that over the long term, Ferrari will find their way fully back to the front. And if they do, Carlos and Charles Leclerc will also be a great pairing. Right. Hang on. Lando on the podium at Silverstone again. No reason why not. Look, Silverstone is one of these racetracks that is incredibly fast. A lot of fast and medium corners. And it looks to me like that McLaren car has got strengths in pretty much every area. We haven't seen a massive weak spot for McLaren yet. Yes, they're stronger on certain circuits than others. Obviously, the Austrian Grand Prix circuit was one of those, but Austria has a number of high-speed straights and fast corners. Silverstone has some similarities. A very different circuit, but has some similarities. So why not? Why can't we see McLaren at their home race with Lando at his home race pull off some kind of really shock result? Is it even a shock anymore? Right, 8 minutes till kickoff in the footy. Stick with me, guys. 700 or so of you with us today. Fewer than normal, but that's nice. It's intimate. It's this is like an exclusive group. So thank you very much for joining. If you've joined out of the blue today, I appreciate it. Are you looking forward to the sprint races? I am massively looking forward to the sprint races. When that was announced, there was a hugely mixed reaction. My reaction at the time it was announced was, this is amazing, this is brilliant. Not because I think we should be going like this for every single race of every season, but it's an experiment. And if we can't experiment, if we can't try things, how do we ever move forward in a considered, successful manner? This is part of that process. So yes, I'm really excited by it. It's something different. I'm going to Silverstone next weekend as well, so I'm going to experience part of that. Qualifying on the Friday, the standard qualifying that we all currently enjoy on the Saturday now, which I happen to love. We still have that. We have it on the Friday. And then a sprint race on the Saturday afternoon. The grid for that sprint race set by the standard qualifying on the Friday. So we have much shorter practice, which I also like. The sprint race on the Saturday, I'm not sure how many laps, but it's probably going to be about 20 laps or so. I haven't seen the actual schedule. Somewhere around that. And the result of that race will then set the grid for Sunday's Grand Prix, which will be the normal Grand Prix. So for me, we don't lose anything, we only gain. We lose a bit of practice, but that's not a highlight of the weekend. It means the teams are less prepared. They've got to figure things out on the fly. That can make unpredictable results happen. And we get a bonus little sprint race on a Saturday afternoon, which, I mean, tell me the downside in all of that. I don't get it. I don't get why people are not for this. And this is not how things are going to be forevermore. This is an experiment. And I can't wait to see how it works out. And if it doesn't work out, well, then we don't do it again. You know, that's as simple as that. This is a trial, and that's how it should be seen. So are you looking forward to sprint races in Silverstone? As you can see from my reaction there, I am. Oh, hang on. Oh, God, my phone's... Hang on. One sec. Hello? Okay, thanks very much. Bye. Sorry, that's my dinner ready downstairs. I ordered my dinner for 8:10 so I could get this done, get down for the football, but my food's ready. Okay, right, there we go. That was unexpected in a live show, but that's what you get. Live, innit? Right, can McLaren begin to win races this year? Yeah, we've had that one. I think they can. F1 will never be zero carbon. The food the whole team eats, transport. Oh, we know. Come on, John Webster. We know that Formula One is a hugely unenvironmentally friendly sport right now. They have a plan to get to the event being net carbon zero, and that net carbon zero doesn't mean we don't produce any carbon emissions over the course of a weekend. We will do over the course of a season, but we will. We're going to try and offset those to make the whole sport much more environmentally friendly. That can only be a good thing. And look, everything that we all do, all of us, every single day, has some kind of negative impact on the environment. We can all do a bit to change that, and Formula One are doing theirs, so that's got to be celebrated. It's moving in the right direction. It's not the single answer, but it's moving in the right direction. What do the big teams do with all the money they have but can't use due to the cost cap? Well, that's a good point, but that's all been balanced out, of course, because they knew this cost cap was coming in. So a Formula One team rarely ever has a surplus in budget from things like sponsorships. Even if you take a Mercedes, for example, probably one of the highest spending teams over the last few years, Mercedes themselves have had to input a huge amount of money into that. They had to commit a huge amount of resource to keeping that team going. It's not all coming from sponsors, 350 million quid coming from sponsors. That just doesn't happen anymore. So Mercedes themselves input a huge amount. So effectively what happens is you get as much as you can from sponsors, and if you still have a shortfall up to the budget cap, then a Mercedes of this world will put in the rest. But that's obviously going to be less than they would have had to put in previous years. If you can cover it all with sponsorship, then that's brilliant. That's the goal for most of these teams, and that's part of the reason that Formula One has gone this way, to try and make the sport sustainable financially for the teams and get to a point where the teams can start making small profits. Teams don't make profits in Formula One, or very rarely, very few of them ever do. But that's the point of the budget cap, to try and get to that point where a going concern in Formula One becomes profitable, it then becomes valuable and sellable, and a concern that has a longer sustainable future in the sport, as opposed to now where the bottom half of the grid are all incredibly precarious and could, quite frankly, disappear at any moment. That's the point of the budget cap. So it's not like there is huge surplus money just kicking about that they can't spend this year. There will be a slight overlap in this year, but that will be it, because moving forward from here, of course, all budgets are planned and have been now for a year or so around the budget cap. Right, that's it. My dinner's ready. I'm going to go and get it, and it is, it's 8 o'clock, so it's just about kick-off time for the football. Enjoy that if you're watching it. Come on, England. I cannot wait for tomorrow night. It's coming home, and I will see you guys next Monday. No Grand Prix, of course, this weekend, but keep the questions firing in, and I will join you again after the British Grand Prix, following me being at the racetrack. So if you've got any questions around being at Silverstone with fans back, with that experience and what's it going to be like, I'll try and answer as many as I can then. Still keep the questions coming, and we'll see you next Monday for another one. Enjoy the football. I'm going to go and enjoy my dinner. See you later, folks. Ta-da!